Well, we welcome the publication of the exit strategy, Unlock the Rock, as it's called. We've been working on it with the government for the last couple of weeks, really, and it's part of the collaborative effort that we have had with government since the beginning of this pandemic. The first concentration of our efforts at the beginning of this was to ensure that the health service did not become overwhelmed, and because of the terrible numbers of the medical evidence and the projections and the modelling that we were being given. So we concentrated our efforts on that and making sure that we worked with government to ensure that Gibraltar was safe in that way. Now, coming out of that, transitioning into a liberalisation of the regime so that we restore individual and commercial freedoms is a difficult job. And so we welcome the publication of the strategy that we have been working with government on. It delivers a structure, a framework of principles against which we can then manage this crisis and our emergence from it so that we can jumpstart the economy. It's a phased plan. But yes, we also say today that we should be cautious and people have a civic responsibility to adhere to the new norms of behaviour.
So you've talked there about working with the government on this document, but you don't agree with everything in it, and you've already said that you disagree with the plan to close Linewall Road, Europort Avenue and Chatham Counterguard.
Yes, we don't agree with every single word or every single policy in this document. And as the Chief Minister said when he explained, set out the position in the press conference, we disagree. We've agreed to disagree on Linewall Road and Chatham Counterguard. We disagree with the methodology, the implementation. We don't think it should happen by the 1st of June. So we disagree on Linewall and Chatham.
And Europort?
And Europort Avenue, absolutely. And as I say, we don't agree every single word of this document. But we have worked very closely to ensure that the document is improved, and in that process I have to say that most of the points that we were raising, either on an issue of a clarification of principles or detail on the phased programme or on any other aspect of it, most of it has been taken on board in that constructive engagement with the government to improve it, because this is all part and parcel of the policy that I set out at the outset with the support of my colleagues when this pandemic started, and we were invited by the government to work with them to get Gibraltar through this crisis. We have worked well, and I believe that the strategy that has emerged, yes, we don't agree with everything, but it is a good strategy, a good way forward to try to manage our emergence from this.
Would you like to tell us if there's anything in particular that you would have done differently?
Well, look, I mean, there are always aspects that you would do differently and nuances. I don't believe that it's actually helpful to have a public ventilation of those issues right now. I think it's important. We've had a very good process behind the scenes to try to improve the document that we first saw a couple of weeks ago, like we have with every other policy, whether it's PPE or whether it's testing or contact tracing. On all those issues, we have been working with government behind the scenes. So I think it's where the position that we have arrived at on many of those issues has been arrived with a degree of robust testing of those issues and policies, and what has been arrived at generally has been with agreement, although of course there are always variations of how you would approach things.
So the Chief Minister credited the opposition with having given quite detailed feedback. So you're in general satisfied that though that feedback has been taken on board where possible?
Yes, in general we are satisfied that as I say, most of the points that we have made have either been accommodated in some degree or to a very large extent just completely taken on board. And therefore, yes, we are satisfied that our engagement with this document has produced a strategy that government and opposition, by consensus, can announce to the public and say, this is what we think is the agreed way forward. Of course, we don't agree with every single word or every single policy, but we jointly have worked together to try to get Gibraltar out of this. And then there is plenty of scope for disagreement on domestic issues, believe me.
In respect of how this plan will work, the Chief Minister said that it would be very important and to a large extent depends on people's common sense. and he implored people to read the document to become familiar with what applies to them and the new norms as we go forward. Are you worried about complacency, about people thinking that effectively now we are unlocked, even though actually we're still in lockdown, but we're beginning the process of unlocking?
Well, when we take a step back from this process, I think people need to understand that we have been extraordinarily successful in Gibraltar and lucky at the same time. And that we have bucked the trend, because in most other countries and territories you see that there have been fatalities linked to COVID-19. We've bucked the trend. That does not mean that we are immune or that we have emerged from this unscathed, because we may see a second spike, and then there may be pressure on the health service that we're all trying to manage together and avoid. This plan is a phased plan because it's important to restore individual and commercial freedoms, but people cannot be complacent. The strong message that is alongside the desire that the opposition have that there should be a restoration of individual and commercial freedoms is the message to people that we, each of us, have a civic responsibility to adhere to the new norms of behavior. So, for example, when the social lockdown is finished, and the laws restricting us to stay at home except for certain scenarios are removed, that does not mean that people should rush out, have parties and so on. I think it's important, it's natural for people to want to see friends and family, and they should do so in a measured and responsible way. Let's not go crazy, because if we do, then it may cause a second spike, and then there may need to be a restoration of lockdown.
For anyone who thinks that given that we haven't seen particularly large numbers of people getting the virus, thankfully we haven't seen any deaths in Gibraltar that we know of related to COVID-19. What would you say to somebody who looks at that and thinks that maybe we shouldn't have locked down, and if we should have locked down, that maybe it shouldn't have lasted as long as it did?
It's important, never to read history backwards, and the scientific advice that the government and the opposition received when we were invited to work with the government in mid-March was that the scientific modelling was that there would be hundreds of deaths in Gibraltar. So, faced with that kind of scientific and public health advice, it would have been callous in the extreme not to take the most stringent measures. And I believe that the stringent measures that we took, that the opposition supported, contributed to a very large extent at where we are today. Now, that does not mean that we should be complacent. It does mean that we should restore freedoms, and it does mean that we should try to jumpstart the economy sooner rather than later. But we all need to now look at the next few months, and until there is a reliable vaccine, there will be new norms of behavior that we all have to adhere to if we don't want to go back to greater restrictions.
And in respect of style of politics and how the opposition does its business, you've taken a very constructive approach working with the government since mid-March. Do you expect to continue that sort of consensual approach, or are you going to, or maybe are you going to bring back elements of a more adversarial style of politics?
Well, adversarial politics is not a bad thing, but it's also good for it to be tempered with constructive politics. And I've always said that we are a party, the party that I lead is a party that is willing in the public interest to work with the government of the day on any important issue. And I gave the example before this even happened of Brexit, where we were happy to work with government on that because we think it's a seminal challenge for Gibraltar. Another seminal challenge came about, and the government invited us to work together, and true to the policy that we had set out, we have decided to work together. So on big issues of the day that we make the judgment in the public interest, it is important for us to work together with the government, we will. But we will also robustly test the government on every single issue, every single step of the way, even when we're working together. And of course, there will be adversarial politics on issues on which we disagree, and there are plenty of issues like that, whether it's on public finances, or mental health, or on social services, or on housing. There will be plenty of issues. Once we get the luxury of focusing on disagreements back, that we will have adversarial politics on.